What is happening to me? Why I don't seem to remember to have a daughter? What happened to this baby? I tried so hard to recover the memories, but they would flee from my brain. It was like trying to catch sand with your hands open. I started to feel a little suffocated, then noticed there was a faint burning smell in the room. I knocked on Danny's door and he didn't take long to open, staring at me with an interrogative look on his face. Baby, do you remember having a sister? He strongly shook his head no. I must have seemed so crazy. Do you remember Mom being pregnant? He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then shook his head no again. I shrugged, defeated, and started to leave, when a simple idea occurred to me. I should show him the room. So I said, "Come with me," and opened that door for the second time in at least 8 months. When we entered the room, it was just a deposit. There was no crib, no shelves with toys, no armchair to breastfeed the baby. Just cardboard boxes, old fishing gear, and unused pieces of furniture. I avoided Danny's eyes because I knew he was looking at me with piercing pity. I drove for 2 hours in Saturday's late afternoon, and we found ourselves in beautiful woods. The last rays of sun created a yellow mist when they touched the leaves. The trees were thin and dark, with luscious foliage. I don't remember feeling as good as I did that moment, but Danny looked like a concerned baby deer. I did my best to reassure him everything was okay, and asked if he could set up our tent while I would make the fire. He looked me deep in the eye and, with a trembling voice, asked me if we could go back home. Now I know what you're thinking. My only kid hadn't spoken for 8 whole months. When he did, he was afraid of something. So I obviously would head back right away, right? It's the rational thing to do. But the woods felt so good. It was the most peaceful place I've ever been. It had an innocent, almost holy aura. I couldn't leave. Come on, Danny. It's a beautiful place. I'll make us s'mores by the campfire. You're just not used to being outdoors, but it will be fun. I promise we'll leave in the morning if you don't change your mind, okay? Danny half-heartedly accepted my words, and while he sat crestfallen in a dead trunk on the ground, I quickly dealt with the tent and the bonfire. By the time the sunset was over and the sky was dark blue before it turned to black, meat and corn cobs were already roasting. I suggested playing games together and trying to recognize constellations, but my son was in low spirits and seemed to have very important business with his Nintendo 3DS. I'm no controlling mother, so I decided to stargaze alone. Everything was so placid that I ended up falling asleep out of the tent, just lying in a blanket. I had a peaceful sleep and sweet dreams, like I was forever floating in a calm lake of liquid fairy dust. Then screams invaded my slumber. "Help me, Mommy! Help me!" When I opened my eyes, the dark thin branches of the trees were literal black arms and fingers, holding Danny above the ground, close to the bonfire. They held him by his face and limbs while he screamed. I got up and ran in their direction, but I couldn't make it before the long fingers threw my son in the campfire. He instantly disappeared, with a small burst of ethereal light. Almost instantly, the trees grabbed me only by the head. It was fast, and somehow I wasn't afraid. I strangely felt a healing sensation. When they shoved my head on the bonfire, it didn't hurt. I accepted I was dying a peaceful, albeit weird death. When I woke up at the hospital, I screamed for my son and tried to get off the bed. "Danny! Where's Danny?" Monica, my cousin and the only family I had nearby, was with me. She patted my shoulder. "Calm down, Diana, dear. Don't get up now. You're weakened. You were found alone by a guard in a camping field. Danny is fine. He is still safely in New Zealand." "He is... what?" But I was just confused because of the IV dizziness. I knew what she was talking about. I've been living a lie, an illness-induced lie. It all started when I lost my baby girl 2 months before I was due. I was devastated. My husband said we could try again, but I was so afraid to go through all this a second time. I couldn't. I just couldn't. I was so depressed and destructive. My husband was always a good person and a good father, but he didn't know how to handle me like that. He took me to doctors, took care of Danny in the house, but he could never understand me. He could never reach me. I was so desperate and alone. One day, he decided to burn all the baby's belongings, so I wouldn't walk around the room like a ghost all day, touching the little clothes my baby girl would never wear. I was so mad I assaulted him, beating him repeatedly. One of his eyes was dark and swollen, his head had a huge bump, and I broke 2 of his ribs. And Danny watched everything. The worst part is I know somewhere deep down I felt sorry. But all I could think was how I would never smell my baby, and now I wouldn't even smell her clothes again. In that moment, I hated him. I am an awful, abusive person. That day, I was on new medication and it made me sleep like a rock. By next morning, they were gone. Both my boys were gone. There was just a note on the kitchen counter. I remember it word by word now, because before I fell into the illusion, I've read it 1,000,000 times. Look, Diana, I know you're in pain. That's why I won't press any charges. I don't want you to lose your job. I don't hate you, but I can't let Danny grow up in such an unhealthy environment. Our baby daughter is dead, but he's still here, you know? He needs his parents. He will be safe and hopefully happy with me and my family in New Zealand. I don't want him to learn that someone can beat the shit out of their spouse and still get to be with them. Please never try to contact us unless we reach for you first. After that, I started to dissociate. Dear God, my cat Barney was eating all the food I made for Danny. That's why she's so fat. That's why she doesn't give a fuck about him. That's why Gloria was worried. He never talked because he wasn't there. And he only ever talked when I got close to uncloak the truth and my mental illness didn't want to let me go. It even made me unsee the nursery so I wouldn't remember the loss of my baby. My mind tried to protect me in the most cowardly way. The trees healed me. They took away my illusion so I could live what's real again. And more importantly, I don't feel emotional pain anymore. I've come to terms with losing my baby. I accept that I don't deserve my husband and son. It's sad to be alone, but it's so much better than being ill to the point of not knowing what is real anymore. Having the weight lifted from my mind is a relief, but you can never take the cure of a mental illness for granted. Guess I'll follow my plan to make that appointment with a therapist and adopt a friend for Barney after all.